Hello, my name is Ty Carpenter. I'm board president of Don't Shoot Portland, and we are on day 2 of our Black Lives Matter, Not Black Friday panel. Today we're with Cherrelle Swain, who is with Black Girls Film, and will be talking to us about Black futures and surviving COVID-19 and the rise of racialized violence. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's such an honor to be able to have this discussion with you today. And I know that everyone that's watching this as a recorded version is going to appreciate this too. And hopefully they'll be able to come back to this for, some resources and some inspiration and some motivation. First of all, I'm going to read your bio. Cherrelle Swain is a filmmaker and creative strategist who works at the intersection of social impact, racial justice, and activism. As a consultant at Maestra, Cherrelle works in partnership with brands across business, entertainment, and media to activate systemic change. Her background is in education, social entrepreneurship, racial equity, and philanthropy. She has deep experience in building public-private partnerships and expert in connecting people and ideas to identify and solve problems. As a writer, she covers social impact, entrepreneurship, and community activism. Cherrelle previously served as the Director of Community Engagement and Strategic Partnerships at Citybridge Education, where she worked to increase access and opportunity for education to entrepreneurs of color, resulting in multi-million-dollar investments into school founders of color, building equity-centered schools and ventures in Washington, D.C. In 2020, she co-chaired Black Voices for Black Justice DMV Fund to provide financial resources to community-based activists in the greater Washington region. Cherrelle worked as an associate producer for Black Boys Film, currently streaming on NBC Peacock, and is currently working as producer for the upcoming feature-length documentary Black Girls Film. She serves on the board of directors of 2 Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit organizations, Good Projects and One World Education. And I was fortunate enough to meet you during one of the Good Project stops in Portland, the Party for a Purpose tour in 2020, and that was an incredible experience. Being able to take a walk with you all down Killingsworth and through the historic Albina neighborhood here in Portland. So that was a beautiful experience that I'm grateful we were able to have.
Thank you, Ty. I'm grateful to be rejoined with you today. And I remember that day vividly and the amazing community of activists and organizers that you all have doing really important work for the culture. So thank you for having me. Absolutely. And then before we get into the conversation, I wanted to share my screen and share a video that I think just speaks volumes to a little bit about what you and Tress are going to talk about today. I'm going to have to edit this out too.
You are the first Black woman to be captain on any starship at any time. Yeah. She knows pressure because she used to kill zombies. But now she's taking everybody through the universe. How's it feel?
Oh my goodness. Well, I have to say, before I get started, I have so much admiration and respect for all of you and Whoopi. You mean a lot to me. A lot of your work I shared with my family growing up. And so you kind of hold those memories with me. Color Purple and Made in America and Ghost. And I lost my parents recently. And so it really means a lot to me. But I also want to say that making history in this way and being cemented in history in this way as the first Black female captain of a Star Trek show what I have learned. I've been growing a lot lately and changing a lot on the heels of losing my parents. Yeah. And I realized that I was very self-oriented about it all. And I thought it was up to me to do it perfectly and do everything right to pay homage to the people that have come before me. But this is not my accomplishment. It's the accomplishment of those that have come before me. I simply stepped onto the path that was already laid for me. Yeah. Thank you, by Michelle and by you. And so I am your accomplishment. And I thank you. Yeah.
Undo my screen. Oh my goodness. Hello, Cherrelle.
Hello, Miss Teresa.
Nice to finally see you and meet you at the same time. We talked the other day, but I didn't get to see your smile. So I'm so happy to meet you. Thank you for taking
Thank
the time today. How did you like that video?
Thank you. Wow, it resonates so much, and thank you for selecting it, because it's like, despite being the best, like despite being the most prepared, like despite, I think, just really having the opportunities that fit within our superpowers, we sometimes feel that inferiority complex as Black women. And like, I feel like I'm on a mission to like cut that out, because it's not true, it's not real. And like, we see so many examples of folks with that same feeling, and we look at them like, how is that even possible?
Yeah, we have to forget that lie, because it was never the truth about us. We've always been able to make these things happen. And because of the courage and just the consistency and, let's say, the persistence of Black women, we now have shoulders to stand on that are giving us so much divine access, so much vision. And so it's just beautiful to see it actually manifesting, right? And also the acknowledgement that's happening within it, so that our elders, our ancestors, those before us, know that we have gained the strength that they prayed on and worked into for us. So yeah, I saw that video yesterday and I was like, wait, I got to use that tomorrow. Let me find it. And so I tracked it down this morning so that I could share it with you and for the audience that might be checking out our recorded version. So that they can also see how that works for us. There's with organizing and with cancel culture and all these different dynamics happening to help us realize social change. There's always these issues that we have to be conflicted with, like, are we tired of hearing from the elders? What more can they contribute to us? Why don't they get out of the way so we can make our part happen? I mean, we hear those things happening, but to be able to share pieces like that, I think that can inspire us to how we can learn to work together and how we can learn to appreciate each other. It's not one or the other, it's all of us together. And so thank you for the work that you do, because that is my acknowledgement as well for this whole purpose today. I wanted to hear a little bit more. I know that one of the things that Ty brought up was that you're a filmmaker. And so tell us about how you got into doing that. I know that last summer, because of the protests, what I noticed as a community organizer was that there were so many more people that came into the fight to show up for the movement for Black lives. And the fact that we had photographers and visionaries and videographers and documentarians capturing that, I want people to continue being inspired. I want people that might have had thoughts of like, what's next, to realize that there's so many different parts to be involved in. And as filmmakers, that's a really essential part. We're looking at footage from the 50s and the 60s that's helping us acknowledge that that was yesterday. You know what I'm saying? We're seeing those documents, those meetings, some of the documents from, behind the news that we probably never saw featured on news. We're seeing the behind the scenes documentation of these movements. I saw an article that came out, I think it was on ABC, maybe 40 years ago, of James Baldwin and his family. And I was sitting there like, whoa, wow, he's sharing so much. He's so gracious with this commitment to this dynamic of communication, with sharing his experiences, with demanding better, with showing the parallels to the media. And they didn't broadcast that. That's not something that's a major talking point that everybody remembers when they think about him, but it still exists. And it exists 50 years later so that we get to, analyze it. And so what got you into that industry? What drives you in there? And, how can others be inspired or participate?
Thank you for the affirmation and the question. And I think that it's a perfect one. And I hope it does inspire others to know that anything that they dream possible can be, because I very much, never saw myself as a filmmaker. I did not study film. It's actually really quite an adjustment to even call myself a filmmaker, because my background, as Ty explained, is really in education and community organizing. And so through that work, I would do a lot of convenings. And I thought that film was a great, anchoring piece of content to be able to build conversations so people can learn, so people can ask questions and people can, build community through social justice movements. And so I love this story. There's a film that I really loved around integration of the school systems, and it was called Teach Us All. It was on Netflix for about 3 years. Ava DuVernay's production company, Array, picked it up. And as like an education advocate at the time, it was a film that I was suggesting to a lot of folks to check out so that we could have these important conversations around school integration, the lack of school integration, the progress that has happened since segregation ended, Jim Crow era ended in the United States, and what does that mean, particularly for the Black and Brown community. And so I ended up just reaching out to the filmmaker. Her name is Sonia Lohman, and I reached out to her on LinkedIn, which is why I think that, anyone can do anything, because we can be so tethered. You can really get really full expert. I'm not saying like, yes, she's an expert, but after connecting with her, I was like, wow, she kind of like picked up a camera and shot and figured out ways for the organization that she was involved with to support her in that journey, because it all aligned. And so she and I ended up becoming friends, and I learned about this project, Black Boys, she was working on. And I saw some gaps in areas that I could potentially support in bringing new voices, bringing intergenerational voices, as you mentioned, right? Like, you can't have a documentary and have one perspective, right? That's not going to be full picture. That's not going to be robust. And so being in DC, there's on the ground community organizations like Good Projects that Ty mentioned, who were a part of the film with the work they were doing at the time with young boys and athletics through summer camps. And then there was like the Secretary of Education for President Obama, who's John King, who's another colleague of mine, which is completely sort of different perspective and way of approaching the work. And so originally I got into film by just kind of like casting in a way to make sure that those voices were integrated into the conversation. And then since kind of understanding what it means to make a film and the way that you can use the social impact tenets to support other progress and change for our community, I kind of have been able to just kind of like slowly step more and more into it, to the point where now we're making our own production in Black girls film.
How important is it that you make these films? Because we know, like I know from years of organizing, that a lot of times at our protests and events that we would see a lot of well-meaning people from our community that were white people, right? And they'd say, hey, I got these pictures for you, here you go. Or there would be all these different people that would have like their independent press, and they would be capturing video. And I would see these live streams, I would see the content that was happening on YouTube from the news media agencies, but we never had the resource to capture. And one of the things that I realized was that the way that they were capturing that information, they also were holding on to the narrative. How important do you think it is that you capture and that you learn film, and that other people become a part of that storytelling aspect of this movement work and really just social change, period?
Whew. I think it's so important. For Black girls film, it's really important to us that it's a Black female-led production. That means that my director is Black, I'm Black. That means our director of photography is Black. That means our assistant camera is Black, female, femme, queer, or women identifying crew, right? Because we do believe that we'll be able to capture those stories in a way that is representative of those underlying nuanced experiences and emotions and soft things that aren't always going to translate through conversation or through interviews, but actually just have to be captured through feeling. And I don't believe that anyone outside of Black girls is going to be able to do that with that same integrity. And so I think that from the artistic perspective, from, the production perspective of being able to finance and resource these type of projects, I think there's just been so many information gaps for us. Historically, it's not, I think, I know, because we've seen Hollywood and we can all look at the credits after any film, like you said, whether they be movement or organizing, or whether it's just, you know, something that's on Netflix that's very like Black narrative driven, where you would expect like, oh, okay, I thought there would be a Black writer for this, etc. And it's not. And it is what it is, but I feel like my opportunity and like what I want others to see and also aim towards is that like you actually can, and your experience actually qualifies you so much more outside of film school, right? Outside of having maybe experience in writing, etc. The people who we can't really, you know, train in that way are, you know, the technical folks. And so through Black Girls Film, you know, we are building a database. It's been specifically tough to find Black female lighting and gaffers, to find Black female sound boomers, some of those really technical positions. And so it's also, you know, a reminder that if we're not represented in those things, that means we're in demand in those things. And so in no way, like, is it discouraging, but it's just like a reminder that, you know, there's different things out there to try in the field outside of just like a camera operating, producing, or directing as well.
When COVID-19 happened, we know that a lot of industries were hit hard. And when you talk about censoring people of color, and especially women and femmes and, you know, queer people in our communities, giving them access to spaces like that, do you think that when COVID and the pandemic happened, do you think that there was more of a lacking of access for people that hurt us? Or do you think that because of the uprising and the fact that people learned about all these inequities, do you think that now, let's say in 21 going towards 22, there's more opportunities? Because I'm trying to figure out what happened last year. Last year, there was this huge uprising, and it seemed as if there was this commitment from all industries for the movement of Black lives to support our indigenous communities, to support vulnerable communities, and to show a new investment. Because all I saw was us moving and taking care of communities and everyone following that path so that we could have safety. So people depended on vulnerable communities as essential workers and providers, but is that still happening? And was there a sharp decline of access, or did they utilize those people during that time? What do you remember about that? And if it was anything effective?
I would say, particularly for the film industry, and you know, most of my friends in the industry are either Black people or Black females, and so it was like everything was really halted during the time because there was no particular productions in play, and I think that that's even continued to now, because a lot of the, you know, jobs are just kind of like basic sort of like essential types of workers, even though it's not essential in like the sense that like, thank you for keeping our grocery stores and, you know, our doctors' offices and a lot of our everyday things open, but they're sort of like a lot of everyday roles in film as well that like highly impacted Black families' economic situation and Black creatives' economic situation. And I know that those things are just now kind of like rolling back into some sort of normalcy, where things are in operation. And I think that it's like a really tough reminder that even from the organizers and activist perspectives, like folks who were out there amplifying voices during that time to make sure that, you know, this is a moment that really drives systemic change, like how can like those people ever have the actual, you know, like recognition or support that's necessary? I think that we've all seen like a ton of the corporate commitments, and some folks have been tracking whether or not any of that has happened. And it's like, again, like oftentimes what we see for companies who are trying to make a commitment through some sort of investment or another, it's their marketing departments, right? And so are you even structured in the way to make a systemic change? And so things that I have noticed and I can appreciate are some of the companies that maybe are starting off as a marketing initiative in this way, like we're going to create this fellowship program, for example, right? And then you realize, okay, we did this fellowship program, we did this in year one, and I think that we need to structurally change other things within our organization in order to like put our money where our mouth is to do what we're saying that we're going to do. And like also realizing that a lot of companies do have lobbying control and power and influence, do have legislative power and influence. And so it's just like, there's so many different angles to be approaching the change that's needed for Black lives in particular to feel safe and to have opportunity, economic opportunity, mental health opportunity, right? To feel like we're, you know, not at the helms of all of the violence that's been so like pervasive on in media, particularly across the last couple of years. And I think with the COVID situation of it all, it's just like a huge reminder of how vulnerable our communities are, because we are the essential workers, right? We are the we are the essential workers. We are the highest risk when it comes to a lot of the health indicators that impact whether or not you're like, you know, likely to one, contract COVID, or two, survive. And so through, you know, all of those different perspectives, there's a lot of work to be done, right? And essential workers and folks on the ground, I think, really need to be at the center of those discussions, because I know sometimes in boardrooms that the conversations are so high level that nobody is recentering it around the folks who are the most impacted. And so that's a little bit long of a response, but
No, it makes complete sense, because my whole thought is that during the pandemic, there were so many, like you said, corporate promises, motivations. Everything that I saw was an honoring or memorializing of Black work, Black health, Black love, Black joy. Like everybody was down for Black people. And I was like, okay, we're really moving forward. And then 21 hit, and, you know, obviously the first thing we saw was January 6th, you know, and we haven't stopped talking about it, and people are trying to forget it. They're trying to make it seem like it wasn't that big of a deal. Then we saw, you know, the outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial, and then we saw the lack of passaging of any kind of anti-lynching or, you know, hate bills against the violence against Black people. And even though I was seeing it on TV and I'm watching all these TV shows, I'm listening to all this music, I'm seeing people all over billboards in my community, and I'm living in Portland. But I'm seeing all of this and I'm like, okay, I wonder if that industry is really being able to support our Black people and people that would, you know, support the initiative to include us in, you know, the dynamics of administration and the professional services and all the different agency of business besides just that front center person, forward facing person. Is it really a change that's happening? Because it feels good to be cared about. It feels good to be included. It feels good to think that the next generation of children won't notice that they have to allow Black people or people with disabilities in the room. That is just usual and customary, right? And so to make that happen, we know there's going to be less cis people that are white in positions of power and more of us. And so just on a hopeful, you know, because how else do we disenfranchise white supremacy unless we include more Black people? And we don't want to be the first anymore. We're past that generation where we had to be like, oh, I'm the first Black person to do this, or I'm the first Black person. We want to be the first generation of people to be able to infiltrate white supremacy and dismantle the violence within it. And we want to be able to use our creative expression, our intellect, and our care for one another in order to make that happen. So it is sustainable, right? And so I'm always thrilled to see all these different projects. Another project that I was excited about that you're working on, in addition to the filmmaking, was the project that you're doing with your brother when you were doing I mean, for me, it's like you're liberating history, you're liberating archives, but you're getting information about your own family story and ancestry, and you were also doing some stuff with like Tulsa, am I right?
Yes. First, I just want to respond to one of the things you said. It just really hit home because I keep seeing this frame and narrative, and I just wonder when that's not going to happen, because really, if it's 2021, how progressive can it be if you at this 2021 you're like, I'm the first Black person to, I don't want to be like, and I love that frame of the first generation to be, right? And so yeah, I appreciate that, and there's so much further that we can move beyond that, and generationally I think that we're prepared to do. And I think that a telltale sign of that will just be like, when, the question is like, how do we protect Black community? How do we keep the Black community safe? Because a lot of these situations that we're seeing are doing the opposite of that. And so yes. And so regarding the project with my brother and Ancestral Healing Project, we traced back our roots to, well, my family went through the Great Migration from Alabama. And so I knew they had come from Alabama. And actually on Juneteenth, through another organization that I do work with called Stay Dreamin' and the Creative School, they're actually working with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute and Apple to create digital archives. And so they have a beautiful model that's really similar to what we just spoke of in the sense of how important is it to have those intergenerational conversations, and how do we create space where Gen Z is the center voice, and what does it look like? Birmingham Civil Rights Institute has so much archives from the civil rights movement, but how do those translate to today, particularly if you're 17, 19? And so these young people which the creative school calls griots, are the griots telling these stories. And so that's what originally brought me to Birmingham. And then I said, wait, I forgot, like, I'm from here, like I've been here before. And so that kind of like inspired me to be able to go back, but with a more familiarity and more community to find my way around. And so ancestry.com, I can't subscribe by this tool enough. It's gotten me to the 1700s with my family. And so that's been fantastic. So through ancestry.com, not every census record has this, but I was lucky enough to find this from my second great grandmother, which was the address to the home. And so my brother and I went to that neighborhood in Birmingham, Alabama, and the neighborhood is called Druid Hills, which there's a Druid Hills in Georgia as well. So we're in Druid Hills. It's a redlined community. It's been forgotten. The house looks the same as when my great-great-grandmother left it and went to Minnesota in 1930. A lot of abandoned homes, a lot of bank-owned homes, a hospital with broken windows and shattered glass. And I'm like, where am I? And then when I told the folks in Alabama, I was like, oh, you're from Birmingham? I was like, me too, I'm from Druid Hills. They're like, you're from Druid Hills? So point being, it's just fascinating that through this research, how much I've just been interrogating the question of what is home, right? And is it and redefining what that means, even as a Black person in America, understanding that we don't always have the opportunity to preserve our culture and history in the way that we deserve, because like we spend so much time, like the video that you showed at the beginning, really trying to kind of like create that legacy, kind of like chasing the legacy from one point, one geographic location to the next. And so that was Druid Hills. We got through that. I didn't know it was such a big deal to be having expensive camera equipment and throwing drones up. Everyone's like, oh, you're okay. I said, everybody was great. I made friends in the community. It was no problem for me. And I'm sure that I also have spoken with the economic development team in Birmingham, and there's going to be a lot of things that happen. And so a lot of what I want to figure out through this project is how to actually financially model out potential land that was lost, or it could be forced loss depending on the situation, or they could have needed a new opportunity. So we get to Rondo community, which we also stopped on the purpose tour. And so that's where I really like grew up. Like my grandmother, my great grandmother, they all came to Rondo community. That's St. Paul, Minnesota, and thriving community, building businesses, buying real estate before really like Jim Crow era too much, but it's the North. So everything's integrated, but not really at all. And then the same as many Black communities across the country, a freeway gets built through my family's community, Rondo, eminent domain, the 94 interstate, built right through it. So when I first started this journey, those were kind of like the two focal points. I just wanted to, what's happening in Birmingham, and you know, how did Black people get to Minnesota, and like, what does it mean to preserve what was lost? And so through the project, I've really just learned so much more, and I'm learning so much more. But I'm really inspired by my great grandmother, Annabelle Hitt. She did travel with her mother, my grandmother, her daughter, to Minnesota, and her siblings, there were 8 of them, did the Great Migration up. Some landed in Chicago, some landed in Detroit, and others landed in St. Paul. And so, you know, I just think about how brave and courageous she was, to have started a social club, a country club for Blacks on the bluffs, in the waterfalls, an hour out of the city. I swear Black people don't even go there now. I mean, you know, just really courageous and ahead of her time. And so, you know, through this story, we're honoring her legacy, the legacy of her ancestors, and the legacy of the future generations to come in my family, to be able to have, you know, a visual story. And through it, I hope to inspire other African Americans to be able to do their tracing and to make some resources and guides to help others as well.
Wow, I'm so happy you're doing that work. I'm just so happy. I'm thinking like, so many stories behind every picture to motivate you to want to learn more information. And when I had asked you that question, like, why is it important for people, you know, like us to be the documentarians, to be the ones to catalog, to create the narrative, to tell the story? It's because we get to find out more about ourselves too. And that's what you just shared with me, like, to find out so much, to go back to the home. And like you said, it looked like she just left it and no one else has ever been there, what you could find inside that space. And then the fact that, like you said, the Black economics go there and revitalize by. I know for years I've heard people back even when, you know, Marcus Garvey was alive, you know, talking about leaving and getting our own land. And then we have people that have been resilient here in this land where we were labored and forced to survive. But now we're in a position where we can take that back. We can own. We could buy, we can, you know, research, and what, you know, especially if you find out, like you said, how was this property taken from this family? Was it, you know, stolen? Did they have to leave it? I know that in some of the research we do in our organizing, we've seen like these very insidious contracts and you know, manipulative processes by like even the Department of Justice to obtain property. And when you talk about eminent domain, like there was nothing built here, but you still ran these people out of their properties. And what kind of accountability is on the state to kind of reparate that? When we talk about reparations, there is so much work to do because there is a reparation in every situation. And I'm so happy, like You know, you
Yes, that's what I'm like, exactly. I'm like, and that's the way I'm thinking about it. I don't know, I think that it gets really scary because people are like, oh, critical race theory. Oh, reparations. Oh, I really don't think that it should be called critical race theory or, or what was it? When was it, it was like either reparations or something else. People were having a really big problem with what it was called. But you know what? The actual point is, if everyone went and just did their own research, like I should be able to submit multiple bills to multiple people so we can figure this out, because like from my records, or for example, like, because I'm in DC and Georgetown did a thing. I don't know how much credit Georgetown should get for this thing, but if you could trace back that your ancestor was a slave here, then you can go to Georgetown for free. Hip hip hooray, whoop-de-doo. Like at that time when I first heard that, which was like 4 years ago, I think when that came out, I was like, how would anyone even find that out? So now I guess I'm in a place where I could see like, okay, you maybe could, but you would only find that out by accident. So it's not like you're gonna find that out and then be like, okay, well, let me go to Georgetown.
And then how much interest they're earning on the pot of money that's sitting there waiting for people to seek it out and find it. Like you're still getting rich.
Instead of just
you're probably
saying,
getting less than 1% of what you owe. And if I take this money, does that mean that I lose claim to what you really owe me? Like, like if I get this money from you, because I used to work at Bank of America. And at the time, we found all these contracts through SunTrust Bank, which was bought by Chase Bank and Nations Bank. And when we looked through all these documents, there were all these contracts and procurement docs and bills of lading that included people like us, our family members, and how old they were and what they traded for and how much money they were worth, so that we could give these loans to these businesses, or so that they could, basically take out loans on their properties. And I was like, wow. And at the time, Chase was like, oh, all these people that came from New Orleans were going to cover their tuition in state. And I think Texas has the same thing going on. But it's like, we're now in the world where this is not the silent generation. And this generation is utilizing information to turn it over. We know that we can't use the master's tool to bring down his house, but we know that there's documents and articles and mandates that provide privilege to those that have that information and know how to process it. And so the fact that we're now engineering the process of economics, now we're engineering our access to courts, we're engineering what reparations should look like, because we know how to, hold these systems accountable. There's so much more. It's not just about them giving out grants or feeling really guilty about someone being murdered by the police and responding to an uprising. That response should never stop. One of the reasons that I think it's important for us to continue telling these stories and to continue being in the moment of looking back in history, which CRT is so scary to them, because the history is like applied historical evidence to kind of, build the framework for what you do next. Don't just go by what you say is right because it's on the record. The record is very complex and violent. But I'm just excited that it's being documented, that it's being discussed, and that it's being used as a tool for getting things done, for motivating people to make demands and to push levels. I hope it doesn't stop, because I remember just 2-3 years ago when people were talking about, like I think John Legend had brought out The Underground, this movie about roots, and was retelling these stories and different things. And people were like, I wish they would stop making these movies about slavery. And I was like, no, like y'all have to understand, because we're getting closer to accountability. And if you don't know that there is a need for accountability, if you don't understand the value of resisting assimilation, then you're going to lose that opportunity that our grandparents was fighting for. They knew that a time of reckoning was going to happen. When we talk about Dr. King and the letter from Birmingham, it sounds like something I could write today concerning how we're, not being supported by our communities in the time of uprising. It's just so much, but to document it is to leave historical blueprints, and we need those because they do help us challenge these systems, no matter how long it takes. Getting it on the record always matters.
Yeah, you got these gems that just keep coming, but for the people, engineering economics, okay? That I love that. I'm gonna keep that top of mind because it
Yeah, we
can.
gotta turn those
it
into the
can
trend
motivate.
words. We need those to be our trend words so we hit, so that everybody says, oh, I got you, okay. I was thinking also about something that you said, as people that have been vulnerable to the violence that was allowed to happen. So it's not that we were just vulnerable people that are prone to being in violent situations, but the awakening that's happening right now. I'm trying to figure out, how do we connect everybody? Because when the uprising started, there was so much connection because we were all inside our homes, quarantined. We were using social media. If people were doing Zooms, you could log on from anywhere in the country, and you could really start organizing and engaging with different people on the ground in different communities. And really, so we could share our strategies and be on the same page. Because as Black people, there's so much that the world says about us, like, oh, Black people don't get along and there's this and that going on. We are just in a white supremacist state, and there's so much entanglement. There's so much entanglement going on that it becomes complicated to reconnect. But I think that last year gave us the ability to say, you know what, forget the entanglement, let me get back together with my family and move forward. How do you see things moving? How do you think we should generate the continuance of our networking against those barriers of, white supremacy ideology that's kept us on separate sides? Because, the haves, the have-nots, the thugs versus the African Americans and all that other stuff that they've used to kind of create distance for us. We were able to overcome that last year. I saw everybody together and I couldn't believe it. I was like, whoo. And we're not even the ones organizing. This is amazing. Everybody's together on the same page. How do we hold on to that? How do we grow that? What impact do you think is happening? That's a lot, but what are your thoughts about what happened and how we keep that going?
Yeah, it was an amazing experience to be a part of the movement in ways across the last year. And I know that there's so many others who have been over and over and over again across these last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years a part of these movements, right? And so I definitely would consider myself to be, a newbie in the space. And I think that there's a couple ways. And one, I want to do a question back to you, because I know that you all actually do data collection of sorts and are keeping track of different legislation and things for people to be involved in ways. And I think that that's really important to keep the pin moving forward, or the needle. And so I can answer it from, like, I think a film perspective and the approach that we're taking through Black Girls, which is, as Black female creators, right, how important it is for us to have beautiful, positive, affirmative examples of ourselves through media. Not that we need the reminder on our own, but also for our communities to see, right? Because I think that, like, what, in my opinion, needs to be improved is that, Black women in particular are the caretakers of our communities. Like, how can our communities take care of us? And so that's just something I want people to be thinking more about. Like, Black women have started more companies than any other demographic across the last, like, I think that's a really recent data point, within the last 5 years, more than any other ethnicity or demographic. I think that's from She's All That. That's a documentary on Netflix that folks can check out if they want to look more into that. Black women are a most represented group in the healthcare industries, right? These service industries, these healthcare industries, even starting your own business, like, without the support to be able to continue to sustain that means that we are then burned out. It's no different from the movement, right? Like, folks that are on the front lines really oftentimes do embody they're a representation of who they're trying to protect, right? And so like to feel vulnerable and to be vulnerable in that way while trying to care for your community and trying to push and progress culture forward so that it is safe, so that it is equitable, is such a huge undertaking, and it is exhausting. And so that's why, you don't see, people as organizers, quite frankly, on the front lines for 50 years, because it's not sustainable. And so like, how do we care for those who are doing all that they can to the point of exhaustion to care for our communities? And so that's one. And then also, another data point that I've been talking a lot about through the Black Girls Film Project that I'm really proud of and also just not surprised by is that Black women care for other Black women and attribute Black women to their own success, mentally, professionally, emotionally, spiritually, in so many different ways, more than any other ethnicity or demographic. And so also just to continue supporting one another, especially Black women supporting one another, because we know what that looks like on the other side, and it's not small. And so like, understanding those narratives, I think empowers us to know that, we got us and we got each other. And there's a lot of power in that. I think that we can teach other people to be able to be better caretakers of us.
So right on so many points. And I love it because I was trying to figure out, like my nephew was murdered in gun violence back in 2010. And that's what motivated me to become a community organizer, because I didn't know what else to do. I was like, well, how do we protect these children? How do we make our community safer? And so I started, auditing the systems, joining all these committees and boards and doing as much as I could to be active. And then at some point I became a protester because, the murder of Mike Brown, and I ended up getting arrested a year after his death at an event that we were having, which was like a community art project. I was like, okay, we've had so many protests. We've done so much legislative work. We've been doing all this stuff to get these people elected. And it was following the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. And so, Prince had sent a call to action telling everybody, show up for Freddie Gray on May 1st. And on that day, the protests were really big. And so from that day on, I kept getting all these different death threats and things like that. And I was already trying to figure out, like, how do I make this safe? How do I still communicate what's going on in our communities and what we're saying on these front lines to people that want to hurt us? And so my thought was like, I'm going to create a community art project. And on the anniversary of Mike Brown's murder, we're going to do a community art project to kind of build a plenary on all of the different work that we've been doing to build that explanation out. And that's what ended up happening. I got arrested. I had to, go to court, be acquitted. And I said, okay, I'm going to start an arts and education organization, because instead of using the banners, instead of protesting, which we still obviously do, but instead of doing it in the way that people would want to run me over or arrest me or assassinate me, I'll do it in a way that people can't ignore it. Like, you can't control art. You see behind me, I got like Hyundai Wiley and Toni Morrison and Basquiat. Like, we make sure these children get access to these books. We work with the trauma-informed situation when we're doing our advocacy. And then when we do our protests, it's huge. We're using like archives and federal documents, and we got lawyers there to help people file lawsuits. And so it's become an instrument, a systemic instrument. And one of the things I was thinking about moving forward is that we have the proprietary values to create our own instruments, to create our own businesses, to create our own industry. And I think that partnering together, again, with people that are on the ground, that have been doing the grassroots work, those people that are in those institutional spaces or have access to institutional privilege, which is resource, rather than providing all of that intellectual information back to those systems to get what they got, it's literally time to just take it and redistribute it into our communities. Because if they're not able to have direct access to us, to provide, and then to leave when they feel like it, then they don't have power. But if we basically engineer a relationship or negotiate with them from the inside or the outside or wherever we are, that to build substantial change and to be really an interrupter in that, we have to have these dynamics of resources for these communities so that we can establish partnerships. I think that's going to be the way to stay. I'm like, I love to infiltrate these systems and I don't want to support their hustle, but we have to establish and maintain what kind of motivation we have right now. And there's so many different businesses and alliances that can grow from that. And it doesn't have to be owned by agency that has been historically oppressing us. Like we have power to own our agency. Huh?
And like, it's like you have that third party opportunity to be that connector where you can help someone that might have resources and have that goal to.
Because you got a built-in bully pit. I remember back in the political days, people used to be like, as a political leader or as an elected leader, I have a bully pit. I'm in a position of influence and I can make these institutions or these agencies or other politicians. Well, we have that right now as Black people. When we talk about Black girl magic and we talk about Black privilege and Black excellence, the fact is not that we have a race card. We actually have evidence that we are essential to this instrument that we call America. Like, it does not operate without our intellect, without our involvement. And the fact that we were able to hold agency for the whole year to cover, like, people that aren't even Black benefited from the Black Lives Matter uprising last year. They benefited from our trauma, from our overcoming, from our gathering, our networking, our marketing, everything that we did. I've seen people on TikTok being able to literally take care of their children just for sharing their feelings. And I don't want to see that stuff get co-opted, because I'm like, you are a genius, like the stuff that they're saying. And it just shows you how connected we all are because of how we've been treated in this space. But we need to make sure that we fight for ownership over our intellectual thought, feelings, actions, and things like that. And again, that's why I think it's so important that people like you in the industry that you're in as an educator and as someone that now has the ability to document and the ability to influence people that fund documenting. Like, there's a lot of work for you, but at the same time, it's a privileged position because like I was telling my daughter, she has a online magazine called Compose Yourself Mag. And I was like, the future is in, stuff like NFTs, information, images, documents, words, and we have so much. And it is not for entertainment purposes, it's for educational purposes. And it's going to be the inheritance that our children have been waiting for generations.
Ooh, speaking my language. Oh my gosh, yes. Engineering economics, okay? That is the name of this session today. Welcome to Engineering Economics. But yes, I mean, I work as a consultant, so I work with a lot of these companies that have made these commitments, and mostly through my work with a Black female-owned creative agency called Maestra, who's done just a really fantastic job of being able to be that third party to make these partnerships make sense, because these companies can't do it on their own. And so it's not that they're where they should be, in the sense of even if they were more diverse at a C-suite level position, that still might not be. They still would need partnerships to do this work well. And so the partnerships, theme is critical. And so for folks out there, who might have creative talents, who might be working for a nonprofit right now, doing fundraising or doing strategy or as an analyst or whatnot, like, I think that pathway for aspiring entrepreneurs or folks that might be dibbling and dabbling into different contracts and whatnot is a great value add to a need that is persistent around organizations having made those commitments, likely, because it was, catchy, but also because they want to, but also they don't know how. And so it's like, again, what do you do with that? If maybe you are a person who can help, I think that that's a call to action to at least, put yourself out there in that way. And then two, just around the economics of being a business owner as an artist, right? Or as a filmmaker or as a visual artist or graphic designer or writer. the last couple of years, there's been huge economic opportunities for folks who've had their businesses established in certain ways that are considered like the Small Business Administration's standards. And so when we think about being stewards of resources, when we think about even being able to attract resources, sharing that information between one another, it's a really, really critical time to do entrepreneurship. I know it's not for everyone, but I do think that it is an economic pathway to have less restrictions and limits, especially when done in community. And as it relates to the NFTs and the decentralized finance and this new, these new gates that are opening up, I would definitely encourage folks to stay knowledgeable, to stay informed, and to put a little bit of potential skin in the game if you have any extra resources towards Coinbase, towards Marketplace Watch, or towards any of your favorite artists who may have NFTs, so that you can just learn what it means to have a wallet, right? To buy an NFT, to be able to do that process. Maybe it won't turn into anything, but maybe, Bitcoin's worth $60,000 now. 15 years ago, it was worth nothing. And so when we have the opportunities to be on the early sides of things, I think that's, it's important that we actually recognize it as an opportunity.
And I was going to say that when, right after the death of Michael Brown, in 2014, I remember in some of our early organizing events, like we would organize at this place called Dawson Park in our community, and people would come. There would be these, college students, and they would come and they had little papers written, talking about Bitcoin, or really at the time it was cryptocurrency and stuff. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, we didn't know what it was about, but they were like, hey, look, y'all need to check this out. And people weren't listening. And then there's in activist spaces, and especially in communities where there's a lot of organizing going on, a lot of the Black people that are coming to these front lines, there's these, we have, the white allies or the comrades of people of color that come around. And because of their situation in the world, and let's talk about finance, economics, privilege, they can say, we don't care about capitalism, or we're not going to do this, or we don't want to do that. And I've even seen myself saying, yeah, I reject this or I reject that while I'm homeless, why I don't have food, why my family is struggling. And it's like, wait a minute, if your family owns a $2 million house and you're going to college and it's fully paid and you have a car and you're living rent free, you can't come down here and talk to these people who just lost their child and can't even afford a burial and tell them to, ignore capitalism. And I'm not talking about like the capitalism that causes mass incarceration. We know that all capitalism doesn't stop us from being murdered. But some of these aspects of what we're doing, how we're creating, how we're being innovative in this movement work can create capital for those families that are vulnerable. Even myself, after my arrest, I was like, you know what, I'm starting a nonprofit, and you're going to have to, deal with that. You're not going to have a fight with Teresa Rayford. You're going to have a fight with Don't Shoot Portland, a community action plan that has community art projects. And it's hard to fight a company, but at the same time, now I get to be who I am. And that's what people need to understand, is that your grief, a settlement from the police, any of those things that happen is not bringing back the injury or the loved one, but it can impact society if you're able to continue that work. If somebody's able to invest in the trauma that you're dealing with, that has created a commitment to change, that investment needs to help us all, because that death is not in vain. We're people like myself, we lose our loved ones and we keep fighting, and it's not work. It's the only thing we can do. It's the only thing that makes you feel alive. And so, again, I'm so thankful that you're in the situation that you're in, and that the country and the world that we live in is looking for ways to connect with people that are doing this essential work, because I don't think that the world can continue to evolve without it. I think that we saw the reckoning of how weak our democracy is, with Donald Trump in office. And I don't think that he's the one who started racism, and I don't think it got better or worse under him. I think that we just have more technology to share more and communicate more. I wanted to kind of end this out on, first of all, finding out, because obviously we're all still talking about Tulsa, and that is a big uprising. When we talk about your work and your journey as an educator and the things that you've learned as an adult about your family and what you're doing with that in order to build economic values. Do you want to share the history of Tulsa with people that might not know that history? Because what I've learned this year is that so many people didn't even know about racism. Like, they're just now learning we got racism in this world. So, I mean, if they're finding out about gentrification, they would really go crazy if they realized that there were entire cities that were burned to the ground for the privilege of whiteness to be established. And so I know that you're in that work in some way. And if you don't mind sharing, I think it'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it is fascinating that you said that to find out some people don't know that that's happening, because I went to Tulsa for the 1921 100-year commemoration of the Tulsa race massacre. And on my way home, I had an Uber driver. What are you in town for? Told him what I'm in town for. And then he's like, oh, I don't want to like get political, or I didn't know about that, or da-da-da-da. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna be back for Juneteenth too. But anyway, point is, right? It was like, how do you like, okay, so that was number one. Number two, the exact same scenario for the Purpose Tour that we went around to 13 cities in 19 days to honor lives lost to police brutality or systemic racism. Tulsa was stop number one. We were talking with college age students, maybe recently graduated. They didn't learn about that growing up from Tulsa. So for us to expect the world to know, or even the country, but you know, in 1921 in Tulsa, Blacks had economic strongholds in their community, and they had a self-sufficient community, which actually is not uncommon and wasn't uncommon during that time. And the whites in that community were not so fortunate, in the sense where there's this statue on native grounds there, and there's a Black man. The statue is all in copper or silver, and so the first figure is a Black man. No, you can't see the color of them, but the first figure is a man in overalls. He looks tired, he kind of looks worn, his clothes look wrinkled, even though it's a statue. The next statue is a man in a suit holding his child's hand. And then the third statue is a man with his hands up like this. And then like the fourth statue, it's a man with the overalls with a gun. So with a rifle. So the man in the overalls is the white man, right? The man in the suit is the Black man, and the man with his hands up is the Black man. And what they used to do to them to preserve their egos was just kind of strip them of their things and then put them at gunpoint and just make them walk down the street with their hands up to humiliate them. And so that's, I feel like, a artistic figure of kind of what it felt like during that time. Although you are self-sufficient as a community, as a business, business owners, there's still that need to dehumanize you in American white society and culture. And so, the race massacre, destroyed this community to the point where there's reports of airplanes and bombs and complete destruction of the community. They counted, I don't know how many hundreds or high hundreds or thousands of people that were actually killed. They don't have the burial grounds marked. It's just so really of a frustrating thing to talk about, because I saw a lot of similarities in Tulsa that I saw in the Birmingham community of my ancestors that I was telling you about, in the sense where not as much redlined specifically in Tulsa, but the government just has this way of just kind of like swooping in and making something a baseball stadium. And it just seems so weird to me, because it's like, how is that appropriate? And how is it appropriate that like these graves have not been, unburied in any way? And that there was $2.8 million of economic loss based on the businesses that were destroyed. And like I said, and like we said, like there has to be that kind of like bespoke, customized engineering economic plan for each family. And that is possible. And if it's, whether it's the responsibility or like the likelihood that a family will get that more through than an actual, advocacy effort by an organization or government, is something that's still going to have to be, uncovered. But yeah, that was $2.8 million, which is at least like $30 million in value today. But that's just the value of the business and of the real estate. That's not of like the legacy and the years of bloodshed and the trauma that's carried through that, because elders from that community are actually still alive and remember that, or heard stories. If you're a Black community member, white community members obviously never heard about it. So
they got privilege.
Yeah, that's the
so
story.
funny that they don't remember the violence, but they always remember that they are in a position of authority. It's like in their DNA,
Yeah. Did you see They Came Before the Brutes? I think that's on HBO. Really good in terms of a depiction on settlement colonialism.
They came before you said the Roots?
It's called, did I say They Came Before the Brutes? I think I just got They Came Before Columbus and something else tied together. The actual title is Brutes.
Roots.
Yeah, which is another name for Native Americans.
Well, they just took down a statue of Thomas Jefferson after 187 years. So, I mean, if that's supposed to signify that we're getting somewhere, I think, again, the more that we share these questions and these answers and this history, the more we realize it's our accountability that we get to work on this. No one has ever, like in our lifetime, I've never heard of organizations fighting to find out these things that have happened to us, to hold agencies accountable. It seems that family members are learning, that little communities are coming together and starting to build these demands, which are leading to the work that happened in Tulsa and other parts of the country. And I think that right there in itself is motivation for people to say, you know what, if I have this scrapbook and it has some information, and that library or that records and management office in my community still has documents, I can start putting some things together. And again, with the social media and the way that we're able to get access to information now and share access, this is like the prime time. I think a commitment for the next generation is going to be in information aggregation. And I think that's going to help us start building and developing these puzzles and timelines, and really that return on investment that, again, we've never been able to get it, but I think it's going to be undeniable for us to be able to receive it. If people can get a settlement from TikTok, for them taking their content or their intellectual property or sharing their information, then there's a legal standard for reparating these traumas and these loss of properties for people. We just have to connect our dots. A lot of people, through displacement and everything else, we don't know exactly where we originated, where we started from. But like you said earlier in this conversation, Ancestry.com and what are some other ways that people can start kind of tracking down, or do you have some ideas that you can share for people to like start the, what I grew up in foster care, but I lived in Portland, so I had access to my family. But for somebody that's like, wait, you know what? I want to know where I came from, and maybe I don't have access to ancestry.com, but I'm from this city. What would be one of the first things they would need to do?
Okay, we just renamed the title to Economic Engineering Through Information Aggregation. Okay, bars, that's you with the bars. Okay, amazing. I can't wait for the playback. I think that Ancestral.com has been the best for me. I'm also wanting to. It's so funny because I started this journey and I thought it was going to take me 3 weeks. So then I was talking to my best friend and I was like, hey, we're going to do you next. She's adopted, right? So it'd be like a lot different of a pathway, but we were going to just kind of take her pathway through, which would be much different than mine. But the joke is that this is 3 months later and I'm like barely like through mine because I learned so much. And so within first of all, Ancestry.com has a 30-day trial. So even if you don't have the $30 a month for the subscription, you can do 1 month for free. So I would recommend that. And I would recommend, if possible, whether foster care or adopted, or whether or not you grew up with your biological parents, to start with your own birth certificate. Because on your birth certificate should be, if possible, at least the name of your mother. And oftentimes for these records, it's really helpful to have the maiden last names of mothers. And so if you know that and the year that they were born through Ancestry, they give you hints. So I'm telling you, I didn't do nothing. Ancestry just be like, pew, 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 pew. Yeah, and so it's just these census records really. And so I literally started, I knew my grandmother's name and my grandfather's name on my maternal side, and I knew my great grandmother's name, and that's it. And I know that's a lot. And so I don't want to speak from a place of, I want to recognize my own privilege in that, but I didn't put in a lot. What I've learned, the coolest things, well, one's cool, one's I'm still unpacking, is that my great grandfather, which not my great grandfather, my grandfather, no, my great grandfather was a founder of the Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity in Indiana University and was a lost founder. I'm like, the fact that my grandfather didn't know this, the fact that I told this to my uncles, it's crazy. It's crazy. I'm like, that's not even that far back.
Wow.
Yeah. And on my mother's maternal side, I was telling you the other day quickly that I was like, everything's in Birmingham, but I actually got to Selma. And so from that side at Selma, their last names, this is the last records I found. They're all census records. The census records gives you a few things. They give you really fascinating. They give you your mother's, they give you the name of everyone in the household. So for this particular record, it was fascinating. It was the oldest record I found. I think it was 1830. So I think this is my 4th great grandmother or 5th great grandmother. We'll just say 4th. Her name, race, the options they have are Indian, Black, mulatto, or white. I didn't see any Indian listed on any of them. I didn't look through all of them, and I didn't see any other listed on all of them, which shows you that these records are not perfect, right? Mm-hmm. Because clearly there were Indian native people, right? Clearly there were other people. Yep. And mulatto, like, what even is that? No one even says that anymore, right? And so for these records, I saw Celia King, age 33. And then it also says, like, if you know the place where their mother was born, it said mother born in South Carolina. And by then I'm in Selma. So I'm like, oh, wow. I'm like, okay. And then it said Aura King. So I'm assuming that's her daughter, 14 years of age, mother born in Alabama, like, because that was probably her mother. And they were both listed as mulatto. And it also tells their occupation. And they're both listed as domestic servants. And so I'm like, okay, this was the first time I had seen the King last name. I'm like, this seems like a plantation to me, like 1830 domestic servant. Like, what does that even mean? So I just like Google King plantations. Google's another big one. I haven't done the library part as much, but I really want to explore into that, and public land records, because some of my ancestors, I saw like the ownership for property compared to rental of property, and I should be able to find deeds and records. So I do want to do that. I have not yet, but I did Google that King plantation. So then I found Van Buren King, Charles Van Buren King, Vice President of the United States, whose family traveled, wealthy family. He went to the UNC Chapel Hill. Family traveled with 500 slaves from South Carolina to Selma during a gold rush, like a gold rush of land. And so I think that that's the family that is like the responsible for 5 generations of my family being listed as mulatto. And it might not have been him, but also it was fascinating because he's a vice president. And they had a huge foundation. So though that's the type of things like, you know, that you can be prepared to sort of find as a Black family. You're gonna get to the plantation likely, and likely you're gonna get to South Carolina or North Carolina, because that's kind of where everyone came in from. I found that my mom's maternal and paternal side. So I think that it's like you said, it's like the information is the power. Mm-hmm. And so maybe at a different state, even like where we were like last year, you know, how you said you entered into the organizing work. So almost like, you know, like really like enraged, but trying to redirect that to drive change. But it's like, now we can look at this and I can just look at it as more of like an aggregate towards a larger plan. And so for like this reawakening period, I'm happy to be there, because I don't know if like the other me at Howard University at 20 would have been so level-headed, you know?
Mm-hmm. But it all makes sense, because even like in California, the property that was given back to the Bruce family, the waterfront park property in California, I mean, it's time to find out, because once you find out, the sky is the limit. America, the laws and the policies and the mandates in all these different counties and jurisdictions, that was made for white people because they had the access. But once you have information, you utilize that access. And so you never know where that ancestry.com information might take you. You might be petty and want to go back there and find out, you know, what's going on. Like, wait a minute, no, y'all, you did this to my family. Petty. I have questions because I'm petty. I'm petty. I am so petty.
Oh yes, best believe.
Yes. I'm super petty. I want mine. Like, you owe, pay us what you owe me. If nothing else, just the documentation. As a family, that's some work that we do. My family name, as far as I can find, the furthest family name was Mazik, and that went back to Mississippi. And we ended up finding out that our family was in Natchez, and that's where, you know, like at the time that Medgar Evers was murdered, the NAACP office that he had was owned by my great aunt, Hattie Mae Mazik. And so I'm like, what? And they were like, yeah, all the land over there was owned by the Maziks, because they bought the plantation that they were on and then started buying up the land and built a school and some other businesses. And I was like, wow. And how did we get to Portland? And it's funny because Medgar Evers' wife, his widow, she lived in Bend, Oregon when I was finding this out. And so my aunt was like, yeah, and we started the Medgar Evers Foundation for his wife and children. And so the fact that you had Maziks here in Oregon and Washington, and then the Evers family here in Oregon and Washington, and to find out that our family was really good friends with Charles, his brother. And I'm like, wow, so how did a generation, because we were children and the parents were children, so nobody thought that was important, but it's so important. And when we see where we're going in the world, it's so much more important to get reconnected and to regenerate those memories, because they still mean something and we have ownership in them. So thanks for sharing all of your stories today. I mean, wow. I have so many ideas and thoughts, and I got like 4 good movies I need to check out.
Well, we're gonna stay in touch. I'm excited. Yeah, that's nuts about that story though. And to me, I think what's most empowering in this journey is like figuring out how that aligns to you, because you're a testament of that continuation. That's
Well, I got to meet her, and it was at an event. It was during the uprisings with Ferguson, and it was at a temple here, a Jewish temple out here. And somebody was like, Tressa, you know, Medgar Evers' wife, Mamie Eckers, is going to be speaking, and I want you to be my guest. So we get there, and I'm sitting in the front, and I'm like, okay. And I got on my little I Can't Breathe shirt, and, you know, literally came off the front line and was like, don't nobody want me in here. I smell like tear gas and pepper spray and all kinds of stuff going on. But I was there, and they were like, do you want to meet her? And I was like, yeah. And I remember what my great aunt had told me. So I said, well, shoot, since I'm in her face, let me ask her. And so she was like, hey, ma'am, how you doing? I was like, I'm doing all right. And I said, can I ask you something? She was like, yeah, ask me. And I said, I whispered in her ear, I said, Mizik. And she said, what'd you say? And I said, Mizik. And she grabbed me by my shoulder and said, what you know about that? And I was like, I'm Mizik. And she was like, baby, and she hugged me, and I was like, so you do know my family? I'm thinking like, so my auntie's not crazy. She
that's the thing
definitely
when we have to verify the stories, because they're fables. Like we never
you
know.
never
We have
know.
really made up stuff that we needed to just kind of get us through. So to know and to know.
And to know and to know. And I mean, she immediately grabbed me and was like, what do you know about that? And I said, I'm Mizik. And she was like, whoa, and gave me a hug. And I said, well, I want to talk to you. She said, well, I'm leaving tonight. I'm going back to Mississippi. And I was like, what? And so she, you know, like she literally had just moved back. And I guess it's an open opportunity to contact her anytime, but it was a big deal, because when you're in protest mode, and you're trying to inspire this generation to keep coming, keep showing up, keep making these demands, keep testifying, keep working within your community to educate people. And then you stand up next to this mermaid, you know, which that was in her speech. She was talking about the mermaids and how we were the mermaids. And I'm just like, whoa, like I'm about to start crying like I always do. How can people learn more about your work and stay connected to what you're doing and continue to uplift you?
Thank you. You can stay connected with me on social media. My IG is my first and last name, Cherrelle Swain, Cherrelle Swain. And you can also follow me on my website at cherrelleswain.com. The Black Girls Film Project is Black Girls Film on Instagram. And our website is blackgirlsfilm.org. And so I'm looking forward to staying connected.
Well, thank you. We're going to continue to uplift you. I really appreciate your time. I love your spirit. I'm so proud to be able to be connected to you in this world. Yeah, so much love to you. Hope you like my shirt.
I love it. Oh my gosh, I have a shirt that says the same thing. I have to get you one if she's still making them.
Yeah, send it to me.
Yes.
I put it on today because we got the news that Malika Shabazz has passed away. You know, Malcolm X's daughter, and you know, she finally found out the truth and had people released that have been, you know, incarcerated for his death. And so there's so much news going on, and it just all happened within 24, 36 hours. I know you were out the country and came back in, but once you tap in, you'll be able to check it all out. But the fact that it, again, is happening in our lifetimes and that we're able to witness this and learn from it and share, it's just so important to keep sharing stories and to talk the truth and bring it to the center of a lot of the situations that we find ourselves in, because it will give us answers. And I just want to thank you for your time and thank everybody that's tuned in for, you know, being with us today. Black Lives Matter, not Black Friday. So
Black Lives Matter, not Black Friday. Thank you.
right on. You have a great week.
Blessings for everything that you're working on. I'm looking forward to staying in touch. And so this is the first of many conversations.
Yes, we have to stay in touch. I'm sitting here crying. You
I know, that was emotional. I'm like, whoa.
It was a lot. I mean, we're not trying to follow the status quo's formats of having interviews and doing these type of panels. We're doing it how we feel as people, so that it's organic, and so that when people receive it, they know it comes from love. So I just want to thank you again, and thank everybody that's paying attention, and y'all stay in the fight. We need you.
Yeah, together in the fight.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.